Van Halen, in my humble opinion, one of the most important rock bands in history. I grew up on this band, and as a kid, starting out playing the guitar, Eddie Van Halen was without doubt my biggest influence. Um, and especially the Roth era albums, they were kind of like, I knew these albums like the back of my hand. And would play along with the stuff on these records religiously. So this is really a video about my feelings on the standout albums and really my recommendations for anyone unfamiliar with the band who wants to learn a little bit more about the band and maybe get into the music. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, and this is the beginning, the very aptly titled Van Halen 1. Now this is an awesome debut album. They never sounded so good. The energy level on this album is through the roof, and Eddie's playing is just really on point. Right from the opening track, Running with the Devil, to the closing number, On Fire, this album has loads of Van Halen classics, or what would become Van Halen classics. Ain't Talking About Love, I'm the One, Ice Cream Man. And of course, Eruption. How many times have we heard that being played in a music store by like a 12-year-old kid or something? This really kind of just explodes out the block, and for me, it's kind of taken on mythical proportions. It's right from the cover to the to the music itself. There's a kind of a dark energy on this album, and yeah, very exciting album. Thoroughly recommend it. Now the second, the follow-up album, Van Halen 2, pretty much continues in the same vein as the first album. You're No Good, Somebody Get Me a Doctor, Dead or Alive, amazing Van Halen tracks. Spanish Fly sees Eddie venture into a nylon-stringed guitar with an amazing tapping section at the end, just a little bit like Eruption. And what I've always liked about Van Halen is their ability to take, a cover song which isn't necessarily in their genre, but just turn it into a Van Halen track, Van Halenize it. And that's the case with the opening track, You're No Good. With the first album, we had a couple of covers as well. You Really Got Me, Ice Cream Man. So yeah, a really good album. And the third album, Women and Children First. Again, another really solid album. The opening track, And the Cradle Will Rock, sees Eddie moving into keyboard territory a little bit. Guitar solo is amazing in this track, and it's just full of Van Halen humor, with tracks like Take Your Whiskey Home and Could This Be Magic. So again, another really solid offering. Now, this album, which is the fourth, an album called Fair Warning. This is a really interesting album. It's probably the least commercially successful in terms of the six Roth era albums. But for me, it's one of the most interesting. Eddie reinvents himself, if that's possible. He kind of takes it up a notch, and what I liked about those first Van Halen albums was that Eddie was always trying something different and new on every single record, and you kind of get the record and think, well, what's he going to do on this one? And it opens up with a track called Mean Streets, and the intro to Mean Streets is really Eddie going extraterrestrial. It's just it really is out of this world. One or two Van Halen classics like Unchained, Mean Streets, obviously. And again, the band is moving into a keyboard-esque kind of territory with Sunday Afternoon in the Park and One Foot Out the Door. But a really strong album, a dark album, but a really exciting album, and thoroughly recommend this one. If there is such a thing as a weak album from the first six Roth era albums, I would have to give the prize to this one, Diver Down. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a great album. It's just full of covers. It opens up with a cover, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? You've got tracks like Big Bad Bill, Dancing in the Streets. It closes with a cover, Happy Trails. Again, Van Halen fused every song that isn't originally written by them with a Van Halen-esque quality, which is what makes them so brilliant. But if there is an album which I would say is kind of a little bit lazy in terms of original material, then it would have to be this one. Having said that, Hang 'Em High, The Full Bug, amazing Van Halen tracks, great guitar playing, as you would expect from Eddie. Cathedral, which is a staple in the Van Halen canon in terms of Eddie's solo spots. What he does with the delay pedal, very innovative, and a big influence on my playing as well. So yeah, it's not a bad album. It's just for me, it's probably the Van Halen album I listen to least, but a great album nonetheless. The final and sixth album from the original Roth era Van Halen. It's an album called 1984, and probably worked out to be the most commercially successful for the band. What I like about the album is it took risks, and I know that the keyboard aspect to this album was a real point of contention for the other guys. But it was a risk and it worked out, and it opens up with the title track 1984, which is kind of a keyboard intro. I think it's an Oberheim OB8, which were really big at the time. Moves into Jump, which obviously everybody knows, and a big keyboard track, and has full of Van Halen classics like Panama, Hot for Teacher. Closes with a track called House of Pain, which is one of the most darkest EVH riffs, but pure Van Halen ends, in pure Van Halen style. So it's a great album, thoroughly recommend it, and it's pretty short. It's about 30 minutes long. I don't think anyone makes albums which are 30 minutes long these days, but you actually literally don't have time to get bored. So yeah, great album, 1984. We now enter the era of Van Hagar. Now I know that this is this period is very much debated a lot in terms of the Van Halen purists, but from my point of view, it had come to an end, and Roth had left the band, and rather than see the band break up, they got a new singer. Now Sammy Hagar, what I like about Sammy Hagar, I'll go into what my likes and dislikes about Sammy Hagar, but definitely what I liked about him is that he wasn't a David Lee Roth clone. He wasn't trying to mimic David Lee Roth. He is very much a man in his own right, and had a very successful solo career when Van Halen picked him up. Now this, the first album with Sammy Hagar, 5150, this is kind of a love-hate relationship for me. What I definitely don't like about the album is the way it sounds. It sounds a little bit too compressed, and Eddie's guitar sounds compressed. It sounds a little bit tinny. I think Ted Templeman, or losing Ted Templeman, was a major factor. Mick Jones and Andy Jones did great in terms of production and engineering, but it just didn't sound like Van Halen was, certainly the Van Halen I was used to with the original 6 albums. Nonetheless, it's a very strong offering, and it's full of. I can see that they really tried to knock out tracks which were very radio friendly, with tracks like Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, Love Walks In. My favorite track from the album is a song called Summer Nights. There is an energy in the album. It's kind of the band rejuvenated after David Lee Roth. A great album. Just not what I was expecting in terms of a 7 Van Halen album. It certainly is veering off into a different direction, but commercially very successral. So can't really knock it from that point of view. And it is what it is. Sammy Hagar is not David Lee Roth, and he brings something to the band which wasn't there before. We're going to lose something as well, definitely, but definitely more positives than negatives. Now, the next 3 Hagar albums are almost like paint by numbers kind of Hagar albums, Van Hagar albums. OU812, got some really outstanding tracks. Mine All Mine, When It's Love, definitely good for the radio. My favorite track is actually a song called Sucker in a Three Piece, which is has a raw energy about it. Eddie's playing on there is great, and overall, again, another sort of album which production side of things doesn't sound like 1984, but there again, it's a different band. But I suppose it's the same band in terms of the guitar, and the three quarters of the band were the same. So I just think they lost something when they lost Ted Templeman in terms of production. But a really strong album. We move into For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, which is this one, which it's got some interesting stuff on it. Pound Cake, Pleasure Dome, Right Now was really successful with the MTV crowd. A good album. I can't say it's an outstanding album. Definitely some tracks that make the best of, but it's a Van Halen album. That's the bottom line. And then the last album with the Sammy Hagar period, Balance. I like the sound of this album. It sounds different to the other ones. It sounds more punchy. And the opening number, The Seventh Seal, really cool. There's also an instrumental on there which Eddie hasn't done before. A track called Balchitherium or something, which I think it means, or I think it's a large mammal from the prehistoric age, is what I've come to believe. But a good album, real strong album. The only thing about Sammy Hagar which kind of annoys me is really him as a lyricist. I kind of find his lyrics a little bit uninspiring, and even song titles, too many of them had the word love in the title. We have Why Can't This Be Love, and Love Walks In, and When It's Love, and I Can't Stop Loving You. And say what you want about David Lee Roth, but in my opinion, he was way more creative, and the stuff he would write about just seemed to fit the music and seemed to work better for the band. So I just kind of feel the Van Hagar period, pretty much these four albums was as far as it really could go. It definitely reached the point where it needed something fresh or something different. But all kudos to Hagar. He kept the band going and made some great music. It's a shame we don't hear that music now that David Lee Roth's back in the band. But it's there on disc, and there's some really good stuff there. And to close, I'm just going to run through briefly these last four Van Halen discs, three of which are not studio albums. This one it's a live Sammy Hagar album. It's called Live Right Here, Right Now. Some good stuff on it. I've heard that it's not totally live, and some of the tracks are redone in the studio. But it's a good representation of Sammy Hagar and Van Halen at that particular time. There are two best ofs. This one is called Best of Volume 1. It actually features two David Lee Roth tracks, new tracks. Can't Get This Stuff No More and Me, Wise Magic. They're good tracks. It kind of brings back a little bit of the magic with David Lee Roth. It doesn't quite capture it. It falls slightly short, but they're still amazing tracks, and it's good to hear sort of David Lee Roth with Van Halen. There's another best of with it's kind of a 50-50 Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth, all the bog standards. There's a new Sammy Hagar track on this called It's About Time. I like it. It sounds pretty raw. I like the production. It's a great sounding track. Would have been interesting if Sammy had stayed with the band. Maybe they could have moved into this kind of a direction a little bit more, but yeah, it's a good track. And then the much anticipated album from 2012 where we saw David Lee Roth rejoin the band. For me, the standout tracks are She's the Woman and Outer Space. Really missing Michael Anthony's backing vocals. He's got to be one of the greatest backing vocalists in the history of rock, and I think definitely was a big factor in Van Halen's sound. And it's a shame He's no longer in the band. I don't know what's going down in terms of the politics between the Van Halen brothers and Michael Anthony, but it seems to me like Michael Anthony seems like a pretty solid guy. I don't know what the problem is, but anyway. But really missing him on this album. You'll notice, or some of you will notice, I didn't mention the one album with Gary Sharon, which came about after Sammy Hagar had left the band. Like a lot of you Van Halen fans, I kind of blanked that out of my mind. The less said about that, the better. So that's recommendations of Van Halen. I'll do a few more of some of the other bands that I really like, and hope it's been useful to you, especially if you're unfamiliar with Van Halen. And don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you again.